Conference. The evidence is compelling. We need to introduce 20-mile-an-hour speed limits on our residential streets. Last year, just on roads with a 30 limit, there were 612 needless deaths, over 12,500 seriously injured, and staggeringly, nearly 100,000 people involved in accidents with some injury. For children from ages 5 to 14, the most common cause of death is being a pedestrian hit by a motor vehicle. Last year, there were 1,934 children killed or seriously injured in 30 limits. Picture your local secondary school for a moment. That's equivalent to every pupil dead or maimed every year. Reducing the speed limit to 20 miles an hour in residential areas is recognised as the most significant move we can make to save lives. How do we know this? The compelling evidence comes from existing schemes, reviewed by reputable sources, including the British Medical Journal. The statistics vary across those reports, but they all conclude that 20 zones and limits reduce road deaths and injuries and open up those streets for people to walk and cycle. In the city of Hull, the killed and seriously injured reduced by 90%. This is actually unsurprising. You know it's very simple. Faster cars take longer to stop and they do more damage when they hit someone. Higher speeds mean drivers have less time to identify and react to what's happening, and it turns near misses into crashes. At 30, vehicles are travelling at about 3 car lengths each second. The margin for error is minimal. A quick glance away and you will miss a child running out from behind a parked car. At 30, and using normal reactions, the impact speed at that 3 car lengths marker will be 27 miles per hour. That may mean nothing, but hitting a child at that speed is an equivalent force to he or she falling backwards and head first out of a 3rd floor window. We say backwards and head first to demonstrate the lack of control a child has in a road crash and the potential for that child to be hit severely on their head and upper body, but also to be run over and crushed. And if saving lives were not reason enough, there are health and environmental benefits too. Recognising these health benefits, the Primary Care Trust in Liverpool have part-funded 20 limits on their residential streets. And on the environmental side, air quality improves and noise pollution lessens. The support for 20 limits has widened to include many professionals beyond transport, with recognition from the National Audit Office, from NICE, and the Association of Directors of Public Health, for example. They all say that 20 is the right default speed limit for residential streets and delivers huge financial savings. The Association of Chief Police Officers have also expressed support where 20 limits meet signage requirements and they can work with other agencies on compliance. And far from being anti-motorist, 20 limits give drivers many advantages. As German researchers found out, they will use less fuel. There'll be fewer injured car users. There'll be less congestion and they will breathe cleaner air. It's popular too. Believe me, it's hard to find anyone living in a 20 limit who wants it put back to 30. A 20 limit on residential roads will only put 40 seconds on the average journey time. Is that such a huge imposition? Who would not give 40 seconds to protect a life? Forward-thinking councils like Bristol, Portsmouth and Bath have introduced 20 limits, but this needs to be universally applied to our residential streets. Which roads are to be exempt and which constitute residential will be decided by local councils using local knowledge. But surely every OAP deserves quieter and safer streets, and every child deserves a safe route to school. We know these are universal aspirations, but now is the time to turn them into universal rights. We did this with smoking in public places. We did this at national level because we do not believe there should be a postcode lottery of air quality. Let me give you another example of national, not local decisions. Wearing seatbelts. Do you remember the Tory nonsense about not wearing seatbelts because it was better to be thrown clear? Yet most people thrown clear die. Seatbelts save lives, so will 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. Look, we know that attitudes and behaviour can be changed by a public information campaign explaining the benefits of 20 miles an hour. And that must be cheaper and more effective if done nationally, rather than putting yet another burden on local authorities. Conference. Getting safely to school or the shops shouldn't be a lottery. Parents want the benefits of safer streets so their children can play outside, and we must no longer accept thousands of people maimed or dying on our roads as just one of those things. There is something we can do where the benefits hugely outweigh the costs. So let's get on with it. Pass the motion and start saving lives today.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can I ask Mark Valadares to stand by? And I call Councillor Tim Ward from Cambridge to move the amendment.
This is, of course, an excellent and well-intentioned motion, and I fully support its objectives and wish it every success in achieving 20-mile-an-hour limits in most residential streets across the country for all the reasons given in the motion. My problem is that in one respect it is slightly too well-intentioned in that it calls for central government to impose its objectives on local councils with targets to meet, local bureaucracies to measure and report KPIs, and central bureaucracy to receive and collect reports and so on. I am the transport portfolio holder at Cambridge City Council, where we are running a project to introduce 20-mile-an-hour limits across the city with, and this is the important point, the details to be decided by the Council in consultation with local residents. In fact, we expect that we will decide to make most residential streets, and perhaps some others, 20 miles an hour pretty much as this motion desires, but we believe that it is up to the Council and local people, and not central government, to decide exactly which roads are in and which are out to suit local circumstances. As others have said this week in relation to a number of other issues, we are not the party of centrally dictated targets, with councils relegated to the job of simply implementing central government policy, with an apparatus of civil servants and council bureaucrats to define and measure progress against targets, with local projects micromanaged from Whitehall. That's Labour's job. We've succeeded in getting rid of a lot of that. Let's not bring it back. Yes, it may be the case that some councils will choose not to do quite what we, as a party of government, might wish them to do. But that's called local democracy, which we're supposed to be in favour of. Conference, please support 20-mile-an-hour schemes and support local democracy. Support the motion and support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Can I ask Councillor Katie Hall to stand by, and I call Mark Valadares from Bury St Edmunds.
Good afternoon, Conference. And I've had quite a lot of my speech just taken away from me, so I'll apologise if I'm a little hesitant. Lines 1 to 33 of this motion are entirely reasonable, decent, sensible, evidence-based politics, which I support. But I'm a child of the suburbs, but I suddenly find myself living in a tiny little village in the idyllic central area of Suffolk. And I get the feeling this motion reflects life in suburbs and in country towns, but it doesn't really reflect life in rural communities like mine. The concept of a residential road in a built-up area can be quite different to that of a residential road in a village. In some linear villages in my corner of England, the main A road is a residential road. In Suffolk, the A12 and the A140, which are primary arteries of traffic, run through the middle of small villages. The way this motion is written, those would be defined as residential roads and would have a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit put on them. A 20-mile-an-hour speed limit would cause congestion, increase pollution, and affect commerce in our small communities. As the previous speaker said, as a party we believe in localism and bottom-up community action, and yet the motion as it is before us denies that. It imposes one solution on communities, regardless of their size, regardless of their circumstance, regardless of their needs. I therefore support Amendment 1, which at least has the effect of empowering communities, allowing them the freedom to develop solutions that reflect their needs and aspirations. So, Conference, please endorse Amendment 1, or if you cannot, reject this motion as well-meaning but flawed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Will Councillor Sue Maguire stand by? And can I call Katie Hall from Bath?
Conference. I was very tempted to make the shortest ever conference speech. Britain has the highest percentage of pedestrian road fatalities in Europe. On its own, those words from the motion are probably all we need to know. But as we're one of the local authorities mentioned in the motion, I thought I would share with you some of the pleasures and benefits that you can get from 20-mile-an-hour zones. I want to share with you our local experience. The Liberal Democrats took control of Bath and North East Somerset in May last year. For the previous 8 years, the Tories had been in control of transport, and we were determined to make a change. We wanted to see streets where the needs of pedestrians were put before those of the car, where people came first. We want to see streets where children felt safe to cycle, or perhaps, as the mother of 2 small and lively boys, I perhaps should admit, where the parents feel it is safe to allow their children out to cycle. This is something that really, really matters to people. People can see why it changes their lives. They can see how it makes their street, quite simply, a better and safer and cleaner place to live. Just last week, I was contacted by a resident concerned about the speeding cars in her quiet little suburban, yes, Mark, a suburban square, where people would expect that it was safe to allow their children out to play. But the cars use it as a rat run. They speed through. They're not even saving 40 seconds on that journey. It's outrageous. People should feel free to walk in their own street. But fortunately, as a Liberal Democrat authority, I was able to tell her that we are currently, over a period of 2 years, introducing 20-mile-an-hour zones across our city. And, yes, we are consulting with our residents as we do this. We are returning the streets to the people. 20-mile-an-hour zones make people feel safer. They can enjoy walking along their street. The exhaust emissions are less, and it improves the environment for all of us. Air quality is, as much as obesity, implicated in improving public health. 20-mile-an-hour limits are popular with drivers and pedestrians. It's not just people on foot who enjoy it. People who are driving are happy with it too. And 20-mile-an-hour zones don't make journeys that much longer. Like the others, perhaps some of my speech has already been taken. I was going to talk about the importance of 40 seconds. How can anybody consider trading a life for 40 seconds? It's not acceptable. Conference. Liberal Democrats in Bath and North East Somerset are making the change. Come and see us. Come and see what we're doing. Come and see how it's done in the rest of the world. And make sure you vote for the motion. 20 is plenty.
Thank you, Katie. Can I ask Michael Butlin to stand by? And I call Councillor Sue Maguire from Southport.
Gosh, good afternoon, Conference. I have to say, and I have to declare, I'm a first-time speaker, so do bear with me. I'm actually delighted to have been called to speak on this motion, but I am actually speaking in support of Amendment 1 because I think that strengthens the motion as a whole. As a teenager, I was involved in a near-fatal car accident. I sustained severe injuries. I fractured my spine in 3 places. I fractured my pelvis in 2 places. I fractured my skull. I had internal bleeding. One of my lungs collapsed. I severed the ligaments in my left knee. I was unconscious for 10 days and I lost my memory for 3 weeks. I think you could categorically say I was pretty smashed. And I was smashed because the car I was travelling in was going too fast. It went too fast round a corner. It hit the curb. The first time it rolled, the windscreen fell out. The last time it rolled, I fell out. Now, I'm a counsellor and a mother with teenage children. And I spend a lot of time with my children on our cycles, riding our bikes, if you like, in and around Southport. So I think those 2 experiences mean that when I'm speaking on this motion, I'm actually speaking with passion and with experience. One of the problems that I see, and why I'm supporting Amendment 1, is that it's really, really, really important that we bring the communities with us. Unless we have the agreement and the involvement of local residents and, I have to say, local car drivers, the move to 20 may not deliver the results that we desire. We need to accept that community involvement is not something you can legislate for. It's something that we need to work on. It's something that we need to generate. Unless we change the behaviour of those car drivers, no amount of signs are actually going to get them to take the foot off the pedal. Now, it's interesting because I say car drivers like they're a separate group, but all of us in the auditorium, or most of us in the auditorium, actually are those car drivers. So it's up to us, to every one of us sitting here today, to make that conscious decision next time we get behind the wheel of our car, that we are actually going to keep our foot off that pedal and stay at 20. When I was a child, before I got smashed, drink driving was almost socially acceptable. Do you remember those times? Yeah? In some cases, people were actually almost congratulated on their ability to drive when drunk. Oh, how times have changed. Now, for the 20 is Plenty scheme to be as successful, we need to make driving too fast socially unacceptable. Conference, I ask you to support Amendment 1 and then support this motion to make our roads safer for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Can I ask John Rogers to stand by, and I call Michael Butlin from Twickenham and Richmond.
I used to be a member of the London Road Safety Council until I got removed by the Tories. And about 2 years ago, before the last elections locally, I was knocking on doors asking for support for their consideration for various people about 20 mile an hour. But I'm actually up here to talk to you about asking you to throw this motion out. And the reason is, I'm asking you, is 20 miles an hour the answer? Because I'm thinking of, in my case, and I'll ask you to think about a place in your case, I'm thinking of a place that I know called Knoll Road in Twickenham. It's got a row of small Victorian cottages on one side. It's a very narrow road. You've got space for just about one line of parking, one line of cars to squeeze by, 2 little pavements either side, narrow. You've got children living in there. You've got cyclists living there. You've got disability individuals in that street. So you've also got, by the way, no restriction in terms of weight or size of vehicle going down there, and it's at 30 mile an hour. Now, I'm even sure that I wouldn't want to drive down there at 20 miles an hour, never mind 30 miles an hour. And in fact, on Thursday, what I really should need to do is go along that street and knock on the door and say, do you want your street to be child safe? Because if you're a parent and you think, well, it'd be nice for the kids to play outside, because people, even in expensive Twickenham, like to think that their children can actually play out on the street. And I also say that, are you happy with HGV vehicles coming down this street? And yes, they do actually go down this street. The next one up the road, which is a one-way, actually has HGV vehicles, HGV vehicles coming down the wrong direction. But that's because that's the way they do it. But what I'm saying to you is I will be going to them to find out what they want, because I think they should have control. And what we seem to be saying here is we're imposing this. I don't see we're giving them the right to grab it down. If this had said we give our residents the chance to say we want a 5 mile an hour or 10 mile an hour or 30 mile an hour or 20 mile an hour, I would agree with that. In other words, it shouldn't be something that we are giving down. It should be a right. If you live on the street, I believe you should decide who's on that street. I believe the street residents should decide, do they want a safe zone, as it's called, or a home zone? Do they want a space for the children to play out on the street? Now, this particular street I'm thinking of, it's actually got a nice big green area right next to it, Twickenham Green. Unfortunately, it's across the main road. So even if this street was child safe, you wouldn't want to let them run across the road onto a big green area. And the other thing I don't think I'd like them to do is have a big HGV vehicles coming through, unless there, of course, is a delivery for white goods. So I think what we should be saying to ourselves is we need to give priority, I believe, to pedestrians, to the young, to the old like me or even older, the disabled. And when it comes to setting down a nice simple principle, I'd like to go to the Danes and say, if an accident occurs and it's a cyclist knocked over a pedestrian, it's a cyclist's fault. If an accident occurs and it's a cyclist knocked over by a car, it's the car's fault. We're not having a discussion about whose fault it is. That is the way the law should be written. So I'll ask you, in this case, like the theory, but I want to see us give the right to the people who then take that right and use it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Can I ask Chris White to stand by to summate, but I call Dr. John Rogers from Bristol. John is the Deputy Leader of Bristol City Council.
Thank you. Conference, I fully support 20's Plenty, and in Bristol it's becoming a reality in all our residential and indeed shopping streets. Over 80% of our residents support safer, healthier and more community-friendly streets. It's a popular policy and it can be done now. We're currently consulting on the details of 20 mile per hour rollout across all our streets. The Liberal Democrats have led Bristol since February 2009. Our minority administration has delivered Cycling City and 2 major 20 mile per hour pilots, which have been extensively evaluated by university lecturers and others. This year, my Cabinet colleagues have successfully bid for local sustainable transport funding, and part of those funds will help us to roll those 20 mile per hour areas right across the city. The benefits are clear. I speak as a recently retired general practitioner. 30 years of delivering evidence-based general practice. I now have the honour of standing as our candidate to be Bristol's first elected mayor. And if any of you want to see how 20 mile per hour zones work, you're very welcome to come down. We've got an action day on the 6th of October. 20 mile per hour areas are supported by strong evidence of benefits, as we've heard from other speakers. 20 mile per hour areas support and build local communities, making streets friendlier, less noisy and more people-centred. 20 mile per hour areas make streets safer. ROSPA have shown that a pedestrian struck at 20 miles an hour has a 97% chance of survival. That drops to just 50% if hit at 35 miles an hour. And lower speeds make walking, cycling and outdoor play more attractive, more physical activity, more social interaction, a happier, healthier city. I am, however, speaking against lines 41 and 42. They call for a minister in the Department of Transport to be put in charge of national rollout of the 20 mile per hour residential areas. No! We're about localism. We're about getting things done in our communities. We do not need central top-down governments to tell us what we can do. Rollout of 20 mile Rollout of 20 mile per hour is not dependent on ministers. Residents, councillors, council officers already have the power to make it happen. In towns and cities, let us campaign for 20 is plenty. Let us ask our transport ministers to help with national infrastructure, buses, trains, trams, streamlining regulations, supporting localism. We do not need ministers to do for us what we can do for ourselves. 20 mile per hour areas are popular, safer and healthier. Speeding is antisocial and dangerous. Conference, make 20 mile per hour happen in every residential street in the land. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm sure we all join together in wishing you luck in your campaign to become another Liberal Democrat elected mayor. Will Anthony Hook please stand by, and I call Councillor Chris White, who among other things is Deputy Leader of our group on the LGA.
Conference, I actually quite like a lot, 20 mile per hour zones, and in a couple of streets in my division I am trying to sponsor a 20 mile per hour limit. Using the locality's budget, the highways budget, which is devolved to me by the County Council in its wisdom. I asked for a quotation, and they said, well, you know, to put in the signs and all the other stuff, it would cost £130,000 to make 2 streets in St Albans 20 mile per hour zones. I said, that sounds a bit high, really, given that my budget is £90,000. Could you give me a breakdown? And they said, well, it's actually an indicative figure. It was so much nicer to be told it was an indicative figure than that it was a guess. So I have got, I hope, a track record of supporting 20 mile per hour zones. Just having a look at what people are saying. Now, there are 2 debates going on, aren't there? There's a debate about 20 mile per hour zones and limits, and I do not think there is a cigarette paper between any of us, given the benefits of driving more slowly. But as Tim said when introducing the amendment, we are not a party of centrally dictated targets. We do not want local projects micromanaged by Whitehall. What does Whitehall know about local government? You know the answer. What do they know about Albert Street in St Albans? Even less. Mark also, he thinks the motion is well-meaning but flawed. Katie, strong support there. Massive support in Bath for 20 mile per hour speed limits, and she has invited us to Bath. And of course, after you've gone to Bath, on the 6th of October, you can move on to Bristol. They are very close indeed. Sue Maguire, very helpful, reminding us what it's like to be in a car accident and survive. Although, of course, there is no one here to remind us what it's like to be and not survive, which happens far too often in this country, as the motion quite rightly points out. But, as she says, we have got to bring people with us. The laws against drink driving, let's be absolutely blunt about it, did a lot less to stop drink driving than the fact that it has, over the last 30 or 40 years, become socially unacceptable. It is still socially acceptable to speed in residential areas and indeed to drive on the pavements, particularly if you have a very large car. We have got to fight as Liberal Democrats at local level to make this unacceptable, and this means that any policy has to be credible. John, wonderful speech from John in Bristol. This is going to be popular. It's not going to be popular with everybody. You all know that there will be those who write in and say, you know, you are slowing down the economy by slowing me down. And indeed, you even get people saying that accidents go up because of 20 mile per hour zones. It is interesting to live in a world where you can actually believe that. The key thing, though, for all of us, is that if you drive at 20 mile per hour and hit a child, that child will live. If you drive at 30 miles per hour, that child will not live. Please support the amendment which deals with the localism situation. Localism is key to our party. It is key to making this policy work on the ground. If we don't have localism, then we will be saying centrally that a stretch of dual carriageway in Watford in Hertfordshire, which has got houses somewhere off to the side, would have to have a 20 mile per hour zone. That would cause the policy to go into disrepute. But if you do support the amendment, then the motion stands very strongly and will become an important campaigning platform in the county elections next year and on into the future. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Chris. Can I invite Anthony Hook to speak and summate? Thank you.
My friends, let me first of all thank our Minister Norman Baker, who has fought the case in government for 20-mile-an-hour speed limits and has changed the law so that they're easier to implement and can more easily be enforced. Let me thank councils. Let me thank councils like Portsmouth and Bristol and Bath who have implemented widespread 20-mile-an-hour limits and shown that it can be done. And let me mention our brother and sister Liberals in Europe, who in many places have lowered speed limits too, who have all shown the same courageous leadership. And let me say that the proposers of the motion accept the amendment, which reinforces our party's localist philosophy, because we need on this issue on road safety a partnership of action between national and local government. We have the chance, Conference, proven by evidence of the BMA, supported by senior police officers, endorsed by 7 out of 10 drivers, to save very many lives. Many of you, I know, because you've told me, have suffered the loss of a friend or a relative in a road accident. I've known this pain myself. 10 years ago, I was phoned by my father in the middle of the night to say my cousin was dead. Driving home from teaching a karate lesson, as he did, his car was hit by a lorry on a residential street in Gloucester. Thousands of people a year dying on our roads, thousands of lives lost, thousands of people left bereaved, thousands of people left injured. This is a national public health crisis, calling for national and local action. We need a presumption of action, not just a promise of consideration, because we know that Tory county councils up and down the country will not act on this, because they habitually ignore petitions and demands from the public. We have a national default speed limit of 30 miles per hour, and it's that national default that we need to change to 20 while retaining local discretion to vary from that default. We're not talking about trunk and arterial roads, but residential roads on which most people live, on which children walk to school and on which pensioners walk to the shops. Drink driving, that Sue quite rightly raised, was dealt with by a national information campaign, and we'll need that on this issue too. It was national action that brought in seatbelts and road markings and car safety standards. Our party, Conference, has always been at its best when it's acted radically, not just considering matters. Gladstone didn't just consider the franchise, he acted. Lloyd George didn't just consider pensions, he acted. We didn't just consider opposing the War in Iraq, we acted to oppose it. So, Conference, I ask you to take this chance to demand action to save many lives on the road, pass this motion and inspire campaigners across our country.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And I thank all our speakers for keeping to time. We're moving to, firstly, a vote on the amendment, which is at the foot of page 9 and the top of page 10 in the daily announcement sheet. Can I see all those in favour of the amendment? Thank you. And those against? That is overwhelmingly carried. Can I see those in favour of the motion as amended? Thank you. And those against? There's a couple, but that is overwhelmingly carried. Thank you very much. Can I just thank my aide, Justine McGuinness, and Joe Shaw, who's been running in the hall, and hand over to the next debate.